Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes, profe, ¿cómo está? Buenas tardes a todos, les doy la cordial bienvenida a la última clase de evaluación de los aprendizajes para recordarles hacer el llenado de la valoración estudiantil que va a estar habilitada 7 días posteriores al día de hoy y cuenta un 5% de la nota. Y para compartirles los parámetros de las secciones por videoconferencia. Las secciones se graban, pueden verlas nuevamente en la plataforma virtual. Les solicitamos que por favor silencien sus micrófonos y puedan activarlos cuando quieran hacer consultas o aportes con el permiso del docente. Le pedimos que mantengan su cámara activa. De no poder hacerlo, enviar su excusa por el chat de Zoom. De lo contrario, será retirada la sección y le serán restados puntos en la valoración del docente. Mi rol como moderador es facilitar y apoyar en la parte técnica. Consultas por el chat, personal o general. Les exhorto a tener bolígrafo y papel para hacer sus anotaciones y aprovechar al máximo esta sección que tiene una duración de 1 hora. Bienvenidos. Profe, bienvenido.
Gracias, Elizabeth. Hello, guys. Welcome to this last class for this subject. Let me share my presentation. Okay. Today we're going to finish with the module number 5, how to assess learning outcomes. Well, during this session, we're going to begin with a prayer, as always. We're going to mention what is the objective that we have for today's class. We're going to start talking about learning outcomes, what we have to know before preparing a list of outcomes. We're going to have a debate. Then we're going to talk about the characteristic of students' learning outcomes, what you have to avoid, what verbs you have to avoid, examples of verbs to be used. We're going to have a practice in order to apply this. We're going to talk about the importance of action verbs. Then we're going to have the topic of evaluation tools. After that, we're going to have we're going to mention the indirect measures and the advantages of using multiple methods. Finally, we will have a discussion and we will finish with the reminders for next class. Well, to start the class, let's begin with a prayer. Thank you, Lord, for this day. Thank you for our lives, for the things that you provide us. Thank you for all the blessings that you give us. Thank you for the food and for this class. Help my students to do good in all their subjects. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Well, in today's class, we're going to talk about, the most important is outcomes. But the emphasis or the objective at the end is going to be that you recognize how the different English teaching methods can be combined in the classroom. Well, let's get started. Learning outcomes. When we're talking about learning outcomes, we need to focus on testimonials of knowledge, skills, and abilities. It means that the students need to prove their knowledge through these ways. So they need to have the skills and they have to demonstrate their skills. Before you prepare a list of outcomes, you need to consider some things. First of all, you need to take into consideration that learning outcomes should be specific and well-defined. This is like when you establish your objectives, you need to have your outcomes very clear. So in order to do this, you need to identify the specific skills that the student should be able to demonstrate and produce or know, because you need to be clear what is the curriculum, what is the content they should master. Second, learning outcomes should be realistic. So when we say realistic, it means that you should focus on your students or our students' ability developmental levels, their initial skill sets, and the time available to attain these skill sets. So we need to pay attention to all these areas when we include the learning outcomes. Also, we need to know that the students should rely on active verbs. The students' learning outcomes should rely on active verbs in the future tense. Why in the future tense? Because these are things that our students should master as a goal. In terms of what the students should be able to do because of the teaching that they are, or the lessons that they are going to receive. And these learning outcomes should also be active and observable. You cannot include anything that cannot be measured. For example, you cannot include things that have to do with their understanding, verbs that cannot be demonstrated with actions. So that's why it is imperative that you include action verbs when you define your students' learning outcomes. There should be enough learning outcomes. It means that you should have 3. Not less than 2. You should not have more than 5. Because you need to be specific. Remember, as I mentioned before, you need to be specific. Also, besides the previous points, we also have to pay attention to align with the students' learning outcomes should align with the program's curriculum. We cannot go away, or we cannot separate this from the curriculum that we already have for the level according to the school where we are working. The outcomes developed in your plan need to be consistent with the curriculum goals of the program in which they are taught. So it means that you cannot separate objectives, the curriculum program, and your planning. It needs to be focused on all of those areas. You need to include or take into consideration all those areas. Another important part is learning outcomes should be simple and not compound. It means that you should not mix ideas. You should not mix objectives. The outcomes stated in your plan should be clear and simple. Avoid the use of compound statements that join the elements of 2 or more outcomes into one statement. It means that, for example, this is like when you set your goals or your objectives. You need to focus. Each objective has to be individual. You cannot mix. And finally, when you make your list of learning outcomes, you should focus on learning products and not the learning process. So remember, this is, as the word says, outcomes. Outcomes is result. So you cannot focus on the process. You need to focus on the results, if the students got the objective or not. Learning outcomes should be stated in terms of expected students' performance and not on what the teachers intends to do during the instruction. So we cannot focus on what we intend to do. We need to focus on what the students achieve, what the students developed. So these are the things that you need to pay attention in before you make your list of learning outcomes. Well, now let's talk about this. Nowadays, most teachers are focusing more on developing their students' competences than on their grades. Well, do you agree or disagree? Well, due to the fact you are not here, I'm going to give you my opinion. According to my opinion, well, I can say that many more teachers are changing their vision, are changing their objective or their purposes in their classes. So I can say that many teachers are focusing more on competences, However, I cannot say that they are the majority. No, I can say the majority of teachers, either from English or any other subjects, are focusing on grades, which is not the ideal emphasis that we should have in our classes. Why? Because remember that our objective should be focused on the results, what the students master, what the students can do with the learning that, with the knowledge that we are sharing with them. So we should take them from theory to experience so they can reproduce that experience in the future lives. So most of the time, the emphasis that we have in our classes is shared with the students at the beginning. And in that way, they know where they're going. So during the year or throughout the year, you will see students that are more conscious about their learning process, and they are conscious about what to do with the information they are receiving or the knowledge that they are learning, they are acquiring. So I think this is, everything depends in terms of objective and emphasis, depends on the teacher. So we are responsible for our students, or most of our students, consciousness about their competences. They need to be focused on competences. We should tell them that we need to develop competences. We should not get grades, because grades don't say anything. Maybe grades can be a business card, but not necessarily a student with the best grades has the best performance. So we need to be clear on that, and they need to be clear on that. So this is something that we need to transmit in our classes. Well, characteristics. Now let's continue talking about the characteristics of student learning outcomes. Well, students have to develop certain skills or certain abilities throughout the term or throughout the trimester that we are studying, or in each term. So they should be able to demonstrate or present or produce the skills that we establish as the objective that they should develop. So this is the first characteristic of the learning outcomes. Second, they should rely the way that we establish. This is like our evaluation. We need to recognize the areas that they have been strong, or the areas where they have been weak, because of their development. We cannot give an evaluation based only on an exam. They need to try in different ways to demonstrate their skills, what they have acquired. Second, we need to establish every single learning outcome based on active verbs. As I mentioned before, here we have an example: analyze, interpret, evaluate, select, mention. And then with these verbs, we are able to identify what the student should be able to demonstrate. Present or produce also, according to Mackey 2010, both characteristics. Well, there are, as I mentioned before, we need to focus on active verbs. because active verbs tell us the objective that they are supposed to acquire or they are supposed to get. We need to avoid using these verbs. Verbs that are unclear and verbs that are related to unobservable. It means that we cannot see, or unmeasurable behaviors. The verbs are appreciate. For example, they will appreciate. How can you know this? They will understand. How do you know that they understand? They will know. How do you know that they know? It's impossible. How do you know that they learn? They will learn, they will become aware of, they will become familiar with. So these verbs are very difficult to evaluate because these are areas that cannot be measured because of a behavior. We need to focus on verbs that are can be represented or with behavior, with developing a skill or doing something. For example, they will appreciate the benefits of exercise. It's difficult to evaluate that. They will understand the scientific method. How can they understand? They will become familiar with correct grammar and literary devices. Difficult to know that. They will develop problem solving and conflict resolution skills. How can you know this? However, you could change the approach. So, for example, they will analyze the benefits of exercise, for example, through an essay. So if they write an essay where they can mention the benefits of exercise, then we can know if they are clear or not about the topic. Instead of they will understand the scientific methods, they will evaluate. We can change. They will evaluate the scientific method. So when you analyze, when you evaluate something, you need to go like in details, step by step. You need to take some time and go deep inside the topic, investigate, research about the different documents. So in that way, when they prove that, then you can be able to identify if they master the topic or if they still need to work on that. They will develop problem solving and conflict resolution skills. You can change they will develop, or they will, they will mention problem solving and conflict resolution skills. So in that way, if they are able to identify which are the skills that they need to develop to solve a problem or to solve a conflict, then you are going to make sure that they acquire the knowledge. Well, examples of verbs to be used when listing students' learning outcomes. Well, these are examples, other examples. That it's important that you see different examples because sometimes we block. So in this way, it would be easier for you to measure. For example, the students will explain how the science of exercise affects stress. So it's very, very specific. They will design a grounded research study using the scientific method. So imagine if they need to, if they will design a grounded research study, they need to be immersed in the topic. So they need to know what they are talking about. They will demonstrate the use of correct grammar and various literary devices in creating an essay. So in order to demonstrate something, you need to research, you need to have proofs of what you're going to mention. So this is a very good way to observe if they have acquired or not the knowledge. They will analyze and respond to arguments about racial discrimination. Well, if they analyze and respond arguments where people can ask them about racial discrimination, they need to be clear about the concepts. They need to be clear about their point of view, because if they are not clear about their own point of view, they will not be able to support their opinions. So in this way, when students analyze, they need to prove with either a debate or a discussion, or if it is written. So in this way, these are very good examples of establishing your students' learning outcomes. Now, let's continue with the second practice. You need to write 2 appropriate learning outcomes. If you were, imagine that you were teaching body parts in an elementary school for maybe first or second grade, sorry. So what learning outcomes, what appropriate learning outcomes would you develop, or will you come out? Well, as you are not here, I will give you an idea. So my students' outcomes for this topic, which is related to vocabulary, will be the students will mention the parts of the, will pronounce the parts of the body, or the students will touch or point out the different parts of the body. The students will be able, or will, well, I am going to give you more than two learning outcomes. The students will write the word according to the part of the body, if it is written in a written assignment. The students will the students will sing parts of the body. So in this case, you will be able to identify if the students know the body parts or if they are not clear, because if they have not been able to go through the activities, then you will see that you need to reinforce, or definitely this assessment will be low because the learning outcomes has not been achieved, or you are clear where your students are. Hello, good afternoon, Ernesto. How are you doing? Hello. Hi. Can you hear me? Okay, well, probably Ernesto
Profe,
has...
yo sí la escucho.
Sí, okay, very good. Thank you. Gracias, Elizabeth. Hi, Ernesto. How are you doing?
Hi, it's good to see you. I'm having many problems with my computer.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
I'm trying to log in since 4:20, and it would be impossible for me before. So
Wow, I
I'm
understand, no problem.
very ashamed about that.
Don't worry. Well, In today's class, we are focusing on how to identify or how to assess our learning outcomes, how to assess their students' results. So in order to, let me go back a little bit, in order to establish the students' learning, our students' learning, we need to avoid, or we need to establish, first of all, we need to establish two things. First, that the students can demonstrate by doing, by representing or reproducing. And we need to focus on active verbs. For example, analyze, interpret, evaluate, select, mention. These are the things that they can do, and we can observe, and then we can measure if it was good, it was excellent, good, or not bad. Then there are verbs that we need to avoid using. For example, verbs that are like appreciate, understand, know, learn, become aware of, and become familiar with. Why? Because it's impossible for us to know if they learn. It's impossible for us to know if they understand. We need to see them doing something in order to know that they understand. So these verbs should be omitted when we establish or when we make a list of the students' outcomes or results. And they should be established in future, because this is like the projection that we have with the content that we're going to teach. So here we have a list of examples. So for example, the students will explain how the science of exercise affects stress. So if we are able to explain something, is because we already processed the information and understood the concept, because we cannot explain anything that we have not understood previously. So explain is a good example of verbs to establish our assess, or to be able to project the students' learning outcomes. Another verb is, for example, the case of design, depending on what we're teaching, no? So, for example, the students will design a grounded research study using the scientific method. In this case, is probably any subject that is related to science or design. So if the student can design something, it's because he's clear about the way to do that. They will demonstrate the use of correct grammar and various literary devices in creating an essay. So if they are able to write an essay following specific literary concepts, they are able to demonstrate that. So we can evaluate them. Like, okay, for example, use irony of expectations, etc., etc. So you can clearly identify if the student understands that through the demonstration. The students will analyze and respond to arguments about racial discrimination. For example, if we organize a debate and we want to know if the student is able to support his or her opinion or point of view, the student should be able to respond or support his opinion based on information. So when they are able to base their answers on information, is because they were able to analyze the topic before, so they will be able to demonstrate that through the debate, through the arguments. And as you can see, these verbs are active verbs. So the questions that we have here now is that in order for us as teacher to evaluate if the students acquired or have acquired the information, we need to be clear with the objective that we have and what we expect from our students, what we observe how we will measure, how they will demonstrate us that they master the topic. So imagine that you are teaching maybe first, second, or third grade, and you're teaching body parts. And how can you establish your students' learning outcomes? Example, take here the few examples that I mentioned before. How can you know, how can you make sure that they acquire this knowledge, body parts?
Yeah, I could put we'll demonstrate the body parts using bulletin board or flashcard, I don't know, could be.
Okay,
We'll demonstrate the body parts through flashcards, could be.
perfect. Sounds good.
Could be to design, we'll design body with all the parts, and then
Okay, we can be more specific. They will draw.
yeah, could be better.
Mhm.
They will draw a body and then point to the body parts, different bodies.
Exactly. Perfect. So if they are able to do that, you can make sure they know their body parts. Excellent. Now let's continue with the next part where we are going to talk about the importance of action verbs. Why is it important to have this part very clear in our minds? We know that when we teach, one of the most important, I would say one of the most difficult parts begins the time that we invest before the class, because sometimes the part is funny and is entertaining just because we dedicated a lot of time before. So in terms of visualizing what results we are going to get, we need to be clear on this, that we need to project our objectives on verbs that are active, because we can observe and we can measure. We can know if it was excellent, it was good, or very good, or not bad, or poor, depending on the development of the activity. So this is the first part. Then also we can have direct measurements. It means the classical evaluation tools that we already have, that are, for example, essays. When we develop a test, a written test, and before in the previous modules, we were talking about the way we develop our tests. We cannot create a test without focusing on the objectives. So objectives for the subject, for the topic, are together with the tests. And this is a way, using our tests, written tests, essays, presentations, classroom assignments, and portfolios. So through all these classical tools that we all know, because we have gone through them as students, also we can know if the students have gotten the objective that we had for them. Other indirect measures are the case of self-assessment. Self-assessment, we mentioned in the previous modules, that is where the students look at themselves and analyze with sincerity how they master the topic. Peer feedback, when they can be able to identify how they did in a presentation or in a project that where they work together. And of course, evaluations, well, they are the best at judging. So at the end of the term, as you in this moment, you are going to be able to evaluate this class, this subject, depending on what you received, what you were explained, how you felt, etc. So the same will happen with the students in the exams. I don't know if you have gone through this, but when I was in the university, there were some teachers that were known like the filters, the teachers that were the hardest. I can say that, in my opinion, if your students, if you feel satisfied that your students fail, that most of your students fail and only a few can pass, you are not in the right career, because the results of your students in most, maybe 60% of the results depends on the teacher, because the teacher is the vehicle to transmit the information and help the students enjoy the information that you want to transmit and acquire and apply the knowledge. If your students fail, it's your failure. So the end of the course evaluation reflects if you're doing your work well or not. It's like an auto evaluation or self-assessment for the teacher. So I would like you to be clear that you need to look for all the strategies, as I mentioned in previous classes, that when you teach something, you need to think. Your students need to see, need to listen, need to speak, and need to do. With each topic, you can not only talk about something and expect that the student imagines the correct or has the correct concept of the topic that you're teaching in his or her creativity, or because each student has a different background. So this part is really crucial, that you are clear. Don't be one of those bad professors or bad teachers that considers that failure is very good. You want the students to be afraid of you. Did you have any professor like that, or did you have this experience in high school?
Oh, yes, not just professors. Sometimes there are partners. I have some partners that they feel happy when they say, oh, I just have 5 or 6 students who are passing me the course. And I say, wow, it's amazing. Or we have 2 very bad students, or you are not doing your job, because it's impossible to have too many students returning to the same objectives or something like that. Something is wrong. I say to my partners, you have to check your activities. You have to check what are you doing, because it's not right that you say to me that most of the half of the classroom is not approved or passing for the next level. So I don't know. I try. I all the time try to help my students.
Are you teaching currently?
Oh yes, since 2010.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
great.
I have many years working as teacher, and many of the times of the different years that I have been working, I've been the supervisor, the English supervisor, and then I have to check, and when I was listening to you right now, explaining to me about the objectives, learning objectives, and so on, outcomes, I remembered that I watched some objectives and I said, how you're going to reach this? Because we don't have the materials. We don't have the media. We don't have nothing. So I all the time say to my partners, you have to start with the activities. What are the activities you are going to do? And through all the activities, you know what are the objectives you can reach with your students. So what you say, it's really important for all teachers.
Exactly. Sometimes I guess it's because our professors in the university don't prepare us to understand this part. And that's why when we get to schools and we need to plan, I think we were not prepared enough. We didn't have enough practice because probably we do it like once or twice for a project. We present a speech and that's it. But doing it weekly, daily and weekly and monthly, that's another story. So I think we need to be clear on how to visualize yourself when you are organizing your material, because depending on that, you will be able to analyze your work and your students' results. So another important resource that is indirect but can help us is questionnaires. If the students are able to understand questions, if they are able to have a group work, they can focus on a topic, they can work in groups, and they can explain the concepts. And of course, if you have the kind of students, because depending on the school that you're teaching, if the students are able to or have the level of English to do this, exit in interviews, that would be awesome. That would be awesome. Because if the students are able to sit in front and answer questions and give opinions, then we can evaluate where we're going. So all of these indirect items that we have here help us to achieve this list that we want to make to identify our students' learning outcomes. And what are the advantages of using multiple methods? Or how can we take advantage of this process? It provides students the opportunity to demonstrate learning is an alternative way. In an alternative way, sorry. It means that each student has in mind, is clear about the space they have in the classroom to demonstrate his or her skills. That's why when we evaluate, we have to be clear that a test, well, in our case, this platform that we are using for this subject only accepts like specific answers. It would be awesome if we had the chance to have face-to-face classes and you can be tested in different ways. But if you had the chance to test the students in different ways, like through practices, through dialogues, through discussions, and when they have written tests, they have, for example, the same. We need to be fair when we prepare the written test and don't give like the highest points to activities that are sometimes really difficult for some students. For example, once I remember a test, I saw a test and the test had the highest points in a puzzle. A puzzle, for some people, if the person also is dyslexic or the person has some issues with words, can be really, really hard. And happens that the puzzle had the highest level, the highest points. So if the student was not good at this, immediately fail in the test. So we need to try to be fair and try to give the same amount of points for each part of a written exam. So In that way, all the students can take advantage of their skills to demonstrate their knowledge. So through one topic that we are teaching, for example, let's take the aspect of the topic that we were talking about, the example in before, body parts. They need to be able to understand the correct pronunciation. They need to be able to say. They need to be able to see and recognize. They need to be able to write a word. They need to be able to do a dynamic where they can touch their body parts and identify them. So when they go home, and we need to try to look for games or dynamics where after the class they can remember, because this is the click that we are making with them. So it's not the classical class that is only writing and listening and sometimes looking at a picture and that's it. No, they need to be able, as I mentioned, to see, listen, say, and do. We need to take advantage of all our intelligences, and in order to absorb the language and apply the knowledge later on. So this is the advantage. This is the advantage of taking our work in this way. At the beginning, it's hard because sometimes we say, I don't have time for that because I have 400 students. I don't have time for dedicating so much time. But it becomes a habit. And when it becomes a habit, it becomes easier. And when it becomes easier, you do it with no problem at all. So I encourage you that since the very first time that you begin teaching, get accustomed to look at the topics in this way. And finally, another advantage that we have is that when we take into consideration all these recommendations, we can see the different ways that the students learn. And we need to appreciate that, because sometimes we focus on only, okay, we need to be very, very careful with the way we behave in the classroom, because sometimes we as English teacher take advantage of the students that know a little bit more. Okay, and we only call them. And what about the others? It's difficult, I know, but we need to try to take advantage of those students that know a little bit more and try to help the others. And develop the environment where the students that don't know a lot feel confident to ask, feel confident to look for the answers, and provide the information so they can participate and do activities, although they know a little or they don't know the topic very well. So in that way, the environment that we create, because we have the energy, or we project that energy in the classroom. So in that way, we can discover that sometimes we plan something for the students, and then depending on the skills they have, they come out with answers that are possible, but we didn't imagine. But we don't have to close like, no, it's not that way. It's not that way. Yeah, this week I was checking a student that I tutor, and it's strange, but it happens. When you have a word bank and you check the exams, sometimes you go like automatic. This is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. But sometimes there is an answer that is also possible in another item. But according to your key, that word, that answer in that line, on that line is wrong. And I was like, if I were my students' mother, I would complain because I would say, teacher, according to your key, probably it's wrong. But if you analyze, the answer is possible. It's possible. But we need to be very careful, very careful. Another issue that sometimes we have students from other countries. It happened once. I was coordinator and one of the students complained. It was in an English institute. One of the students complained with an exam because our teacher discounted a point because of a very little detail. The translation of a word. The translation was sumo. Sumo. My teacher, my colleague, was not aware of sumo as jugo in Spain, and the student was from Spain. So the answer was correct, but he wrote, he didn't give him the point, and the student was really angry, and I was embarrassed because I couldn't tell the student that he was, my teacher was right. No, my teacher was, my colleague was wrong. And I just had to apologize because he made a mistake. So, and it happens, before we begin our class, we need to tell a student or our students that we are not a dictionary. We don't know everything. We need to be humble enough to tell them, they need to be aware of that we are not perfect. And when we deliver a test, we need to tell the students, take the exam, check the exam. And if you have any complaint, come to me, I will check it. But we need to give them the space to complain or to respectfully, that's another part, respectfully come to us, and if they have any question or if they don't feel happy with something, we can analyze that. Of course, if we have 400 students, we need to tell them that we can check that, but they need to give us time. But that develops a connection with the students. That develops a certain kind of respect on them, and we as humble teachers, sorry. So all these aspects are fundamental for this evaluation that we make. Let's finish with this question. Why should we be clear about making a list of our students' learning outcomes? Why do you think this little but necessary steps should be done?
Well, I think it's important because if I know what are my students' learning outcomes, then I will know what I need to complement with the other topics after, sorry. Because if I don't know what my students already know, then I'm gonna be loose teaching sometimes the same thing many times. I'm using the same way, that how you say, using the same way that comes start to become for the students a little bit bored.
Exactly. So it's necessary that we are clear where we are. We as teacher and our students as the most important characters in this story. Okay, well, with this, then we finish with this last module. In 1 minute, I would like you to tell me what you take as the most important or the most valuable information that you take from this session.
Okay, I could say that I learned about the learning outcomes that we teach to our students. that we need to have a list about them. We need to use many different strategies and many different methods where the students who use all their skills, because we have many different students with many different skills. And we as teachers, we don't have to use the method that we feel comfortable. We need to go out of our comfortable place and try to think more in our students. And also I learned that we have direct learning outcome, no, direct verbs. And yeah, right, direct. Yes, this part.
Exactly. We have verbs that are direct.
Measures. Okay, the measures, the different measures about how we need to know if our students are learning or not. We have, as you say, using all the ways, observe, listen, coach, and analyze, and can demonstrate.
Exactly. Okay, well, it's been a pleasure to meet you, Ernesto. I encourage you to get on the platform and work on the previous modules that you have over there. And you have 7 days to catch up, and also 15 days if you have to retake any of the assignments, any of the tests that you have over there. So everything, as I don't know if you receive, I send you an email about an internal message recommending you the Pomodoro method, that you focus like 25 minutes on something, take 5 minutes break, and take without cell phones, without interruptions, turn them in silent mode and focus on that. And I am sure that you are going to be able to catch up with these previous modules. Well, I wish you the best. Thank you very much for attending.
Profe, muchas gracias. La sección se da por finalizada y recuerden hacer el llenado de la valoración estudiantil. Muchísimas gracias. Feliz tarde.
Bye.